Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. It's June 26, 2025, the year of our Lord, and a warm welcome to everybody joining us today. We've got a very interesting program. And hello, Matthew Lane, and hello, Frontier. We are, yes, and of course, good afternoon, Prairie. It's interesting. We have all these regulars join us, and we're really honored to have every one of you. And we're so appreciative of your comments and questions because today, on June the 26th, we are just days away from marking the occasion of Canada Day. So we are going to dare to ask, what is Canada Day all about? What was the original vision of our founders as we came together as a nation in 1867? How do we bring a sense of unity and identity? If we're to build a strong sovereign nation, surely we need to know what Canada Day means. What does it mean to be a Canadian citizen? And what are the challenges and issues that we face as a country as we look to this question? So today we are going to have two special guests join us in a moment, but I did want to reflect on a few headlines. And before I do that, I want to thank again our audience. We have so many questions from coast to coast to coast, and that is so befitting a program like this that tries to engage our larger community as a nation on very important questions. And we get a lot of comments. And so thank you very much. We get thousands of comments every month. And one of the comments is, thank you for having the courage, conscience, and integrity for starting this podcast channel. And thank you very much, Good Karma 22. Love listening to you guys. Keep up the good fight. Alberta First Apparel. So thank you so much for those comments and so others. And it's interesting. I've got a number of comments already. Kenzie says, good afternoon at Leaders on the Frontier and friends. So good afternoon to you, Kenzie. Carrie says, I'm celebrating Alberta Day. And I'm embarrassed to say I did not know today is Alberta Day. So that is correct. And hello from sunny Alberta from Kenzie again. So keep up the comments. We've got a lot of news headlines. It seems like every day the world turns. And it's interesting today in the Blacklock's Reporter, it was reported, I think, a very interesting question. The federal government announced that fewer than 40% of federal transactions were tracked and monitored during the pandemic. The Treasury Board of Canada, no less, disclosed this in its report. The figures followed warnings that waste and fraud could happen under the hurried contracting during that period, and the fraud would be in the billions. Quote, we can have the best laws in the world, but if nobody is ensuring oversight at the process, that's where we wind up with problems and waste and potential fraud. Very interesting story. In Alberta, it's interesting, they saw a record energy spending and significant growth in the energy, specifically the oil and gas sector in 2024, according to the Alberta Energy Outlook report released just yesterday and Wednesday. The report highlights some $30.9 billion, a surge in energy spending on projects, and that is as reported by the Western Standard. So very interesting development there. The Trump administration confirmed today, you may have noticed there was a long media conference confirming their evidence that at this juncture, they believe they were able to take out the nuclear weapons development facilities in Iran. And quite frankly, it's an interesting press conference. I don't think I've seen so much detail. And frankly, who knew that they had the ability to zero in on the details of pictures of the actually exploding devices occur. So it's really quite interesting how they're trying to refute some claims by some media that the facilities were not destroyed. So let's keep watching that story. It's also very interesting that a report came out this week from a think tank saying the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist organization that has declared jihad against the Jews, has established a vast network of charities and fundraising across Canada, according to this so-called report. For decades, organizations affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an adherent, have managed to embed themselves in all levels of Canadian society, according to the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. So, very interesting story that's developing. And on a very positive note, I wanted to tell you that on July the 3rd, just after Canada Day, it is the anniversary of the Terry Fox leadership, where Terry Fox set out across the country to raise money for cancer research. The Winnipeg-born and Port Coquitlam-raised athlete embarked on his ambitious Marathon of Hope on April 12, 1980 in St. John's, Newfoundland. And so one of the things that came out is the Adidas Corporation has released a new sneaker to mark the occasion of the anniversary on July the 3rd. And so, it's kind of a heartwarming tribute there. So stay tuned for those Adidas sneakers. Really kind of an interesting tribute there. So today we're talking about Canada Day, but more significantly, we're talking about what does it mean to be Canadian and what are the challenges that we face. So I very much appreciate your comments. It's interesting. Wayne Faulkner says he is Nova Scotia since 1752, French, Acadian, Scottish, Irish, and English. And I think you're referring, I believe, to your background. So great historical mix there. People from all over the world have come to Canada and also joined up with our brothers and sisters who are Aboriginal to create really an incredible nation. And by the way, Kenzie says July 3 is also the date of Alberta Independence Town Hall in Airdrie. Interesting. So who knew? So a lot of interesting comments. So today we're going to welcome two extraordinary guests. The first one I'd like to welcome is Dr. Gerry Bowler. And Gerry is a senior fellow with not only Frontier, he's a historian. He's a delightful man, both with an incredible insight in the significance of history. But I would say, Gerry, you have an incredible sense of humor. So a warm welcome to you, Gerry.
Glad to be here. Yeah.
Well, it's great to see you. And of course, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, he's the Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier. And welcome back to Canada. You were away a little bit into the United States of America. So does it feel good to be back on Canadian soil, Marco?
It does. It does. It feels good to get away a little bit every now and then, but it should good to be home.
Well, it's great to see you. So I want to start off with the question to you, Gerry, about what is Canada Day about? I know you've both done a lot of analysis about all these questions related, but tell us more about the history of Canada Day. What does it mean?
Canada Day, as an official holiday, dates to the 1870s, 1879. But just before we celebrated our first anniversary as a nation, the Governor General of Canada, our first Governor General, Viscount Monk, issued a proclamation saying that he, Governor General, does hereby proclaim and appoint Wednesday, the first day of July next, as the day on which the anniversary of the formation of the Dominion of Canada be duly celebrated. And he enjoined and called upon all Her Majesty's loving subjects to join in the due and proper celebration of the said anniversary. So Canada Day, which was for many, many years Dominion Day, celebrates an interesting experiment. The world's first responsible government democracy emerging from a colonial power. Canada was the first to try and peacefully secede from a colonial founder and to establish a democracy. That's been tried many, many times around the world, not always successfully, but it's been a model for success stories such as Australia and New Zealand. So July 1st is the date that we are supposed to set aside to say how grateful we are to be living in this extraordinarily congenial and successful state.
All right, so this is it. It's our birthday, our anniversary. It's a grateful time that we say, wow, this is a special country.
It is, and we used to do it up proud. We used to have royalty come and visit. It was the day for doing important things like opening the Parliament buildings, inaugurating the Carillon in the Peace Tower, parades, fireworks, speeches, all around community picnics, all around jollity. And then about 10 years ago, we started becoming uneasy about ourselves and have spent the last decade moaning about what a dreadful place Canada has been.
Isn't that interesting? So, how do you plan on spending Canada Day? That's a question I would put to our audience in light of Dr. Bowler's outline that this is a significant day. This is our anniversary. This is it, folks. So, what do you say is the significance of Canada Day, Marco?
Well, as Gerry points out, it is the anniversary of the founding of the Dominion. I think we started using Canada Day just shortly after arriving in Canada. I think in 1980 is the first Canada Day, and we shed the designation of Dominion. And I say that because I'd like to come back to that a little bit later about all the things that made Canada Canadian or used to. We have started shedding slowly. But I'll go back to your question about what does it mean? It means a celebration of the founding of this country. It means the celebration of the founding of a country which was supposed to be and designed to be different from the United States. Canada, and people get their noses out of joint when I say that sometimes, but Canada is fundamentally a small c conservative project as opposed to a revolutionary project. The United States is a revolutionary project. Canada was designed to maintain and to keep the form of government that we inherited from the mother country, from Britain. So the preservation of the Westminster system with a crown and prime minister, and so distinct from a republic, and that is one of the things that we celebrate as well. It sometimes gives us a sort of false sense of superiority because we have a system that is we claim sometimes that is better than theirs. Neither here nor there, perhaps, but it's also the founding, as Gerry pointed out, of a democratic, responsible form of government. And this is significant as well because even though we have a monarch at the apex as the head of state, we do have also this system which allows for the expression of the sovereignty and the power of the population, its people. The people are not sovereign in Canada, the sovereign is, but there is a democratic element in the mix that is quite unique.
Okay, so we live in a unique country here. So, Gerry, my question to you is, as we look at the vision of the founding of Canada, um, was it truly at the time a mixture of many motives? Like, was it just to be, well, over against the United States to preserve this part of British North America, as they say, or was it truly a larger vision? Like I've had the privilege of reading a number of the speeches by the founders, and it's pretty inspiring. So how do you answer that question? What was really the vision of the country?
Well, there were a number of mixed motives. The British wanted to get shot of us. We were expensive and always getting Britain into trouble with the United States. But there's the sort of the parochial fears of being swallowed by a greater power, which might be Canada in the eyes of some of the colonies like Prince Edward Island or Newfoundland. But what united us was the fear of the United States, which had an enormous country of great energy, but proved to be not very successful. they had just come out of a bloody civil war. Their democracy was shaky. So let's try something new, responsible government on the British model, and let's be a new race, an Anglo-Norman race, a race that blended English and French in a way that the two founding races could cooperate, and see if we can't spread this as far as possible. It's a fantasy that turned out to be true, that the four colonies of Eastern Canada turned out to be the founders of a continental power, with visions of democracy, prosperity, and cooperation. There was always, as opposed to the manifest destiny of the United States, of a conquering race, much more a notion of cooperation, confederation in the Canadian dream.
Okay, so we are a proud confederation. And so there's been a lot of very interesting comments here. David Carlson says, Canada is a liberal democracy. We would be wise to enact a more robust system of checks and balances, e.g., based on a constitutional republic. And certainly there's ways, thank you for that comment, David. There's certainly a lot of ways that we can improve Canada. And Steve is just jumping in. He's reacting to your title, over 40 years of, pardon me, I'm not sure if I can see, working across Canada. I think it's a typo. I know who I am. I love this place and its people, not this new stuff that is jammed at me so hard and I don't need. So thank you very much, Steve, for that comment. It's interesting. That's going to be one of the points that we definitely debate about is Canada changing, and is it for the better? And so my question to everyone would be, why are you proud to be Canadian? Not just how you're celebrating Canada Day as well as a kind of an excuse to maybe socialize or relax. And I that's all great. But why are we fundamentally proud to be Canadian? Marco, do you want to take a look at that? Because I know that one of the inspiring parts of your story is that you originated from the incredible country of Nicaragua, and you actually moved to Canada. You said 1980, was it?
1979, yeah.
Yeah, in the aftermath of that communist revolution that was happening in that country. So how would you answer that question about why you're proud to be Canadian?
I think before I answer that I'm proud to be Canadian, or that one would be proud to be Canadian, it's important to understand and define what Canadian means.
Ah.
And that gets us into a pickle right away. Because I have lived in 3 different regions of this country for significant periods of time. I grew up in Quebec. I came to Alberta and lived several years in Atlantic Canada. So I have seen several different visions of this country from the different regions, and there is no one way to be Canadian, which is not a surprise to Canadians, except to the people who want to ram a single vision of the country to everyone else. And usually the single vision of the country that they're trying to sort of ram through is essentially the vision from Ontario. And because it's not even the central Canadian vision, because Quebecers have a very different vision of what this country looks like. So if you ask an Albertan or a Western Prairie Canadian what it means to be Canadian, as opposed to a Maritimer or as opposed to an Ontarian, they will give you very many different answers. And there is no real consensus on what that is, except to say we're not American. But that is a very funny iteration or an expression of what one is. Because if you ask somebody from Switzerland, for example, where there are multiple identities and languages, they do not tell you we are not French. They do not say we're not Italian. They don't say. So, but we do say we're not American. And the fact that we say that we are not American is particularly telling because we don't tell people we're not Korean. We don't
Mhm.
say we're not Zimbabwean. We say we're not American. And so the defining essence of what people perceive to be Canadian, people will say other things. Hockey is Canada, except that so many other nations and countries play hockey, and some of them sometimes are better than us. So what does that say? Others will say that Canadian healthcare is to be Canadian, except that this is kind of a new kind of social program. So does that mean that we were not Canadian before we had universal healthcare, or conversely, and even worse, if Canadian healthcare collapsed, and it is kind of collapsing right now, but say that it ceased to be, does that mean we're not Canadian anymore because we're defined by
Mhm.
that?
Mhm.
So. Uh, People have different ways of being proud to live in this country, and there is, in my perception of it, there is no single expression of what that is.
Okay, there you have it. So there's maybe, if I'm hearing you correctly, no single expression of what it means to be Canadian. And it's fascinating, Marco, that you said that you've lived in different regions within the country. So are you saying that during Canada Day, people seriously would articulate different visions of what it means to be Canadian, or or what are you getting at? Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So, for example, in Alberta, there often Canada Day coincides or very close to Stampede. And the celebration of the festival of the western the western roots of cowboy culture and agriculture and so forth. When I was in Atlantic Canada, Canada Day is often expressed by people going to the military parade. There is a military parade on Canada Day. There are the ships on the at the Canadian bases are open, and people can come up to the harbor and walk onto the decks of these magnificent
Mhm.
men of war that serve to defend our country, and so nothing could be different really than walking on the deck of a destroyer than going to a rodeo to
Mhm.
celebrate Canada. And so in that way, the different ways of being Canadian manifest or beget different ways of celebrating what Canadian really means.
Okay, so the point well taken. So there's different flavors of how we celebrate what it means to be Canadian in our country, and I think you've given some really good examples, Marco. So, Gerry, can we go a little bit deeper? Are there specific values that you would argue define us as Canadians?
No, I very much think so. Um, we are a democratic people. We try and resolve our many differences through the democratic process. We have faith, God help us, in those processes, no matter how often they fail us. We're a tolerant people
Mhm.
up to a point. Um, we are, I think, recognized worldwide as a very welcoming and accommodating people. We are a generous country. We have many non-governmental organizations, many individual expressions of giving. Um, we are um, in our family structure rather loose, um, and this is very important. Um, we like the nuclear family. We're not a multi-generational family culture, which means that we are expansive, tolerant. We marry into other groups. We are not clannish. We are not regionally obsessed. I could name all kinds of failed states around the world that do not have this family structure that has permitted um, Canadians and others of the West to be this sort of open society. Um,
Mhm.
we are largely an outdoor people. We have to be. Either we accommodate ourselves to the weather or it kills us. We're an inventive people. there's much that unites us, but these notes of history and culture have to keep being sounded. We cannot say that we are a post-national state with no values. We cannot denigrate our past to the extent that we have been doing so. We have to emphasize again and again the things that unite us in this impossibly silly country. We are a continent wide and about an inch deep. We speak different languages. A huge proportion is foreign born. The thought leaders of our country are intrinsically opposed to nationalism of a Canadian variety. Everybody else's is fine, but they are opposed to Canadianism. And it's going to have to be fought in the open. And one of the battlegrounds for that is Canada Day. How do we celebrate Canada Day? Let's remember that a couple of years ago, cities were canceling Canada Day celebrations. Calgary refused to have fireworks, a traditional thing. Why? Well, it was the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. How could we have fireworks with that on our conscience?
Wow.
The government lowered the Canadian flag to half-mast for months over an imaginary misbehavior, refused to investigate the misbehavior, but took it as read that Canadians were genocidal murderers. So Canada Day is a splendid time to say just how much we have done good for the world, militarily, in terms of invention, in terms of culture. We're a success story. Let's be happy about it.
Wow, I like the way you're thinking. Let's rise up together and recognize that no country's perfect, but I tell you, Canada's an incredible country, and we should be proud of that. So words like patriotism, nationalism do matter in a good way. If we don't have a sense of unity, we don't, wow, it sounds like we are not sovereign anymore. We won't have a future as a country. So it takes, like, I mean, I look at the founding vision. Let's take Sir John A. Macdonald. The vision that he articulated time and time again is that people from all kinds of backgrounds, including the Scots, including people from every country in the world, could come here, and you could still be Canadian. You could still go shoulder to shoulder, build your future, build the Canadian dream, and you could live together and have those fundamental rights and freedoms. I think that's an incredibly exciting dream that most nations do not have. I can't think of many. I mean, many nations simply do not think that way. Am I simplifying this too much, Marco, or is that pretty special?
Oh, it certainly is pretty special, and this country has achieved an enormous deal, as Gerry points out. In terms of that Canadian dream, we'd have to go back to the founding, and I mentioned before that there's a beautifully edited book about the debates of the Canadian founding, edited by Janet Agenstadt, who recently passed away. A loss to the country, I would say.
Yes.
And one of the things that Janet and the other editors depict very well in the documents that they found is that freedom was always one of the issues at the heart of the founding of Canada. And we all have been in situations in which I think mistakenly Canadians tend to interpret the idea of freedom as an American value. We've heard this sort of argument before. But several of the debaters in different chambers across the colonies spoke about freedom being a part and parcel of the dream of this country. The other one was that they were consciously aware that they were creating a new nationality, that they were creating a new nation stitched out of these British colonies, which included, of course, this overwhelmingly wonderful French Catholic culture in Quebec. And part of that dream also included the creation of what essentially would have been a common market in which goods and would move from one place to the other without any barriers, without any excises or taxes or or what have you. This is in part why we set out to build this railway all the way to the Pacific, to do that, to stitch up a new country, but also a new nation. And those are two different concepts, right? The
Right on.
country is that which is contained within the boundaries, and the nation is the common spirit that the people within it hold.
Indeed. I think that's those are great insights. Today, we're going to do a very special exercise because I know I've seen a lot of comments that history matters and that we shouldn't forget it. And I think both Marco and Gerry, you've spoken eloquently to the importance of remembering our history. So we wanted to look at, well, this is my old and new passport. We're going to go through some slides here, Madam Producer, in terms of looking at, well, what's the difference? So this is the old front of the passport, the new one. So they're pretty similar. And you've got the Canadian coat of arms there, which what do they mean, Gerry? You're very familiar with the symbolism here. Can you briefly explain what that means?
Well, I'm surprised that it has endured so long. It is a set of symbols that mix founding nations. We've got the lion and the unicorn, the Irish harp, the French fleur de lis, the Scottish lion rampant, the three English lions mixed with the Canadian maple leaf. So it is the Canadian coat of arms acknowledging the original founders of the country in 1867, and the motto "Mare usque ad mare," from sea unto sea, from the Bible, and where we get the notion of a dominion, for he shall have dominion from sea unto sea.
Beautiful. So if we look at a next slide here, I thought this is an interesting example. The old one, I thought when I looked at the old passport, I was really inspired by the imagery and the storytelling. And here you can see on the left is the famous Pier 21 in Halifax in Nova Scotia, where so many immigrants can trace their steps back to that gateway. And in contrast, you've got an image of the new passport of people, nice images of people bicycling, riding a horse. But it's truly remarkable here. What's your observation here, Marco, as you look at this change here as well? I'll just reference this one as well. We've got imagery from World War One, where you've got, of course, the famous Stockwell camel. I believe
That's a
played
Newport
a
Scout.
decisive. Pardon me. Sorry.
That's a Newport Scout.
Yes. Okay. So the Newport spout there, and you've got the imagery of the battle site. Now I can't read it from here, but I believe it's
And the War Memorial, we see it on the right.
it's a war memorial, and this is in contrast again to kind of more abstract imagery of beautiful sea creatures, and it looks like an image of an Inuit in the paddling their kayak. So what do you make of that, Marco? Any
Well,
observations?
yeah, I see this. Look, in the idea of uh, establishing a new country, it's the land and the boundaries. But the idea of creating a nation. I'm going to cite one of my favorite thinkers about the idea of nation, a Frenchman by the name of Renan, who wrote this essay the late 19th century called "What is a Nation?" And he says that a nation is a spiritual principle. So it's not about the land, it's not about the lakes, even though there is a spiritual principle in the land, but the idea that people should have by common will a common narrative, a common history, a common set of symbols to which they
Hmm.
can point to and say, this is us. And what I find kind of sad about Canada in the last couple of generations is that we have uh, almost consistently and in some cases systematically tried to shave them off and in some cases erase those common symbols, which then become the common narrative. And so if we erase the common narrative or if we damage the common narrative, then we are essentially damaging the bonds that make us a community of people, a nation. And
No,
so
I agree.
going back to the idea of the passport, that you're pointing to, the old one, is designed to evoke those aspects of the narrative that we hold in common, that we want to aspire to be this common people, this nation. And what is sad about the new one, of course, is that it strips away an enormous amount of that symbolism for things that are, well, in some cases, not just banal, but do not really speak to any kind of spiritual principle or commonality between and among Canadians.
Right on. If we go back to that previous slide, you'll see a picture of the founding fathers. You've got the founding of the railway, and then we turn to bears frolicking on the grass. We've got the building of the railway. We've got both the cups here of the Stanley Cup, right, during this age of elbows up, and we own the hockey game, and booing of the national anthem from the United States. We've got the Stanley Cup there. We've got the Grey Cup, and the contrast is incredible. You've got the RCMP musical ride here on the left, and then on the right you've got a child frolicking like abstractly. So you've stripped out the people, and here we've got Terry Fox, Nellie McClung, and then we've got combines on the prairies with windmills. And if you go to
With
the next
fences
one
that you'd
here,
never see on the prairies.
yeah, like
And
windmills.
when-
Like who designed this? Like it's just
Um,
incredible. And then you've got an Inukshuk, which is an incredibly powerful Aboriginal symbol with the feather and the Métis symbol. And then we've got a bird. Like this is just unbelievable. And I think there's one more here as well. But this is really just it's like they've stripped out the passport. It is just such a pitiful imagery, and then we end up with a squirrel with a nut and a guy raking leaves. It's just unbelievable what they've
Yeah,
done to this common national story.
yeah, it's very much in keeping with the idea that we are a post-national state, right?
Yeah.
And so the expression, any expression of a common identity, which essentially again is a national expression, was kind of erased. And there's not a particularly, I mean, all many Canadians rake leaves, to be sure, but so do people in many other countries of northern latitudes. There is nothing particularly Canadian about raking leaves, even raking maple leaves.
Yeah.
What we've
Oh,
got
it's incredible.
is a contrast between the people who made that latter passport. These are globalists. These are anywhere people. They can fit in at Davos, Bali, wherever. What had been shown in the original passport is that Canadians are somewhere people. We're the people of Canada. We're the people of Calgary, of Inuvik, of Acadia. We have distinct tastes. We are different, and but that's anathema to our Laurentian elites. The game is to erase the past and then inscribe a new future on it, one that is much more to the liking of the Trudeaus and that ilk.
And what is
Yeah.
more, one needs to point out, just as a sort of another layer onto what Gerry is saying, is that this idea of erasing the past and forming new things, namely a new identity, is a Maoist project. The concept that human beings are blank slates. This is Mao's words. That his people were beautiful white canvases, he said, upon which we must inscribe a new story.
Yeah.
And so this idea is not just Maoist, but it's a revolutionary project to erase who we are and shape us into something that is essentially in what they believe their own image. This post-nationalist idea.
So these are very profound points that both of you are making, and the audience is. It's very interesting. Is that they are revising the history of our identity, our story, as a people. And we can keep improving our knowledge over the history from all peoples, including Aboriginal peoples, to people who've come from all over the world to pursue the Canadian dream. So I think this is a very important conversation. As I talked with Dr. Marco Nero Genie, who's the Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier, as well as Dr. Gerry Bowler, historian, and also Senior Fellow at Frontier, as we talk about Canada Day, its significance. And so my question is, why does this history and identity really matter? In the sense that for Canadians, why don't we just kind of go along with the flow and see our history disappear before us? Why is it so important to have a clear vision of who we are as Canadians? Who wants to tackle that question?
Well, it matters in two ways. It matters on a political level. If we are erased as citizens, then we are ready to be reprogrammed by the parties in power. But I think, and that's a horrible thing, that leads us into places where we don't particularly care to go. But it also matters to us as individuals. History and memory make us who we are. If we are amnesiac, we are at everyone's mercy. We have no particular feelings. We are lost, adrift. But with memories, and proud memories, we are rooted. We can't be budged as easily by Silicon Valley tycoons or plutocrats or politicians.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. We have a situation here where if we don't remember these traditions, I mean, I think one of the brilliant parts of Canada is that we resolve our differences through debate and discussion through these institutions. Like, what is it called again? Oh, yeah, the Parliament House. We come together and we resolve these discussions, and that's happened over 1,000+ tradition, right? And so we have a situation where if we give up that sense that we are to respect people's individual rights and freedoms, that we resolve our issues peacefully, then we are on a different path that is a dark one, not one filled with hope and opportunity. Am I being too dramatic about this, Marco?
No, not at all. In fact, if we go back to part of what we were discussing earlier about, the founding of the Dominion, then if we founded it, I mean, there's a reason why people found these things, and it is to preserve something and to keep them. And if we recognize that the founding of the Dominion of Canada is the desire to preserve a certain type of institutions, then we have to give ourselves a bit of an F for not keeping the institutions that we set out to preserve and to maintain. And not, I mean, we still have a parliament and we still have a crown, and so maybe it's not a full F, but the reality is that we continue to undermine the traditions and the institutions that we set out to preserve in 1867. And so if we keep down this path, if we could keep going down this path, we're essentially doing the opposite of what the forefathers of this country set out to do.
Indeed. So as we look at the state of Canada today, we know that there's a lot of, I think, healthy patriotism and thoughtful Canadians who reflect on this history, but there's many that don't. And it's obvious that we need to ask ourselves the question, how do we renew our sense of Canadian identity and citizenship? If we look at our institutions, for example, our schools, what are the solutions by which we can promote this? I know that I came across one of the authors just a few years ago who was instrumental in writing a citizenship guide that I think they did a spectacular job on. I think this was with a government a number of years ago, and it's amazing. That guide is still in existence to my knowledge, but it's a very thoughtful overview of our history, what it means to be Canadian. And so I was really heartened to hear that that guide is still being used. To me, that's an example of what it takes as a nation to really move this agenda forward. So, from your perspectives, how do we strengthen Canadian identity and a sense of unity as a country? Are there obvious answers to that, Gerry?
I would start by lengthening the period of waiting for citizenship. It used to be 5 years. They reduced it to 3. I don't think 3 is long enough to become a Canadian. I'd put it back to 5. We toyed with the notion of having sort of checkbox computer sign-in for Canadian citizenship. We have to bring our new Canadians the way we've always done before a judge to be sworn in with symbols of Canada, Mounties, armed forces, flags. We have to have government and educational officials who are willing to accentuate the positive in Canada. Our textbooks have to instill a sense of Canadian pride instead of constantly subverting it. I don't think we have a leadership class yet that's willing to do that.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is that actually true that we don't really teach civics anymore and that kind of Canadian history? I mean, I find that bizarre. And I know that I think some jurisdictions do, but I think many don't. Marco, do you have a sense of that?
There's only a couple of provinces that actually teach Canadian history. Canadian history, or what used to be taught as Canadian history and Canadian history, have been replaced by social studies. And social studies is a collection of hot button issues that usually come from a kind of radical pedagogy of the left
Hmm.
that wants to teach people, for example, about racism without the proper historical context of what it means to be racist,
Hmm.
or feminist or sexist, or all these sort of hot button issues of the culture. That, as social studies go, sure, there's nothing necessarily wrong with making people aware of these things, but it's not Canadian history. Is not focusing on the main events that led to the formation and the preservation of this identity that we call
Hmm.
Canada or Canadian. It doesn't even have any kind of chronological order. And so it's just a hodgepodge of nonsense. And that's not a way to foster a common identity. I would go even further to that and say, to Gerry, we had 5 years for citizenship years ago when we actually had a strong sense of Canadian identity. I think we need longer now because a
Mm.
lot of those boundaries really don't exist anymore, or have been erased. But fundamentally, individuals, Canadians, and their families we don't necessarily need the state to teach us how to be citizens. We can participate in political processes. We can join parties, organizations, all these sorts of things that also instill this sense of being in a free society, insist on the respect of the rights, insist on the fundamental right to express
Hmm.
themselves as free citizens in this country. All these things strengthen essentially the democratic identity of this country.
It would be
Yeah.
nice if government agencies didn't work against the notion of nation.
Voila. Yes.
You know,
Yeah. So, very good point. So, we need strong national identity so we can work together as a team to build a better country. And so, identity is important that we do teach it to the next generation. And I'm thinking of other institutions as well that could renew this focus on Canadian identity. And I think one of them is, frankly, the military. I think there's been a lot of debate now about this, that Canada is, of course, a NATO laggard. There was an announcement made just a week or two ago by the prime minister, and I wanted to share that clip now, as it's a commitment to try to, quote, rebuild and renew the military.
Canada is already beginning working towards a target of 3.5% of GDP by 2035. By expanding our plan to invest in the Canadian Armed Forces, to modernize our military equipment and technology, to help build up our own defense and security industries, as well as to diversify our defense partnerships. We're also working to ensure that we are spending 1.5% of our GDP in defense and security related infrastructure.
So is that an opportunity, Gerry, to help renew our identity is through the rebuilding and renewal of our military that is woefully unprepared to defend our country?
I just took my grandchild to a military museum the other day in Winnipeg. I was blown away by, I guess, with pride at what our Canadian military has done over the last 150 years. We've always been the good guys. The people that we fought are the bad guys. If you had a list of people like Hitler and Mussolini and the Taliban and jihadis and Balkan warlords, Japanese imperialists, we're the good guys. And people have died voluntarily to be involved in a fight against various kinds of evil. I wouldn't believe the Prime Minister for a second in his promise to reach those funding targets. It's pure babble. We've almost wrecked our armed forces. They are in terrible condition, unable to fulfill any particular national or international assignment. Yeah, we can start our nationalism by rebuilding the military and being proud of Canada's. We're not a warlike people, but boy, don't mess with us.
We have an incredible military history.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said, Gerry. So again, you can see how this is all interrelated. If you have passports that don't even acknowledge Vimy Ridge, let alone all kinds of other parts of military history, it really strikes to the heart that somehow somebody doesn't get the basics of our story as a nation.
Yeah.
And this is really quite disconcerting. So I look at this and I say, look, we need to really pay attention to rebuilding what the pride within Canadian citizens of what it means to be Canadians. So I think we need to ask the question, do we have a political class that just fundamentally doesn't get it? I look at how they cater systematically to special interest groups. I look around me and I think every week there's some declaration that it's some group's month or week or day. And I will go into even commercial enterprises. You can go into all kinds of shoppers as an example, and they will be celebrating anything but Canada Day. It's disgusting. And I look at this and I've actually spoken to some managers of different retail outlets, and I said, do you not celebrate Canada Day? Like what have you noticed that as well? I find this really quite disappointing, to say the least, if not kind of infuriating, that Canada means so little to these people that they're willing to just cater to every other little group. Now, I came across a fascinating not-for-profit group that is trying to help not-for-profits, and they talk about taking good meeting minutes. And the top of the list of the meeting minute is an acknowledgement of territory. So we actually don't even think we live on our own land. We think we're all squatters and renters. So how do you build a nation if you think you're all temporary people that don't even belong here? I don't get this. Am I missing this? Like, this is like, how do you build a nation if it isn't proud and doesn't even know where it lives?
How do you build a nation on compelled speech? I don't know anybody who would make that land acknowledgement if it were up to them. It's something we endure. It's rather Soviet. We mouth these things. We don't particularly believe it. It doesn't mean anything to us. It's supposed to be about, when does reconciliation? So it's another corrosive element in destroying Canadian nationality, to open every public, whatever, a hockey game, a university graduation, with an acknowledgement of a particular ethnic group. We owe Aboriginals a certain amount, but we owe the Jews, the Ukrainians, the Somalis, the Nicaraguans, the Scots something for having come here and built a nation. Yeah, mutter, mutter.
No, no, very good point.
Yeah,
Marco, any comments?
yeah. I think it's not that our leadership and elites don't get it. It's actually that they do get it. This is a conscious project to disassemble who we are by removing consistently many of these symbols and by pushing symbols that divide us. This is not an accident, and nor is this new. Um, George Grant, of whom I'm very fond, the closest thing to Canada has had to a philosopher, pointed out in a tiny little book. I think every Canadian ought to read. Is called A Lament for a Nation, and in A Lament for a Nation, Grant points out that the project of modernity, which is very different from the project of trying to preserve the institutions that Canada set out to preserve at its founding, is fundamentally a liberal project, and liberal with a small l, that essentially seeks to dilute the essence of we are as a country. And he documents some of the early stages of this, in which we start to remove the things and the symbols that makes us Canadian. The Royal Canadian this, the Royal Canadian that. There's only two things left, by the way, that have the royal in the name. I think the Mint and the RCMP. Everything else has been stripped of the royal designation. We have continued to, for example, remove symbols like, for example, the red ensign, which used to be our flag up until the 60s, and so forth. So these things, Grant points out, are in the service of homogenizing the identity of Canada with the rest of the world, with this homogenizing movement in the world. So people can say that this is conspiracy theory that was spun last week, but George Grant had detected the early parts of this in the culture, going back 60 years ago.
No, well said. The incredible philosopher George Grant, and among others, that have really created quite an intellectual tradition for Canada as well. And we would be do well to remember that. So thank you for pointing out that book, A Lament for a Nation. I also want to mention there's some really, I think, some extraordinary books on Canadian history. I was also a big fan of Pierre Burton's series of wonderful, readable history that talk about the nation. So I would encourage you to look at that again, Pierre Burton. Are there other resources that would be good to keep in mind, Gerry, as we think about learning more about the history of Canada?
There's a wonderful book whose author escapes my mind. It's called the 1867 Project.
Yes,
Why we should
indeed.
be proud of Canada and not decrying it. That's a super one to begin.
Yeah.
Get any old Canadian textbook, get an old literature textbook or a history textbook, and see the difference. See what my generation and my parents' generation was brought up to believe in. It's quite heartening to somebody that believes in a continuing Canadian tradition.
Right on.
And
So
we should
I'm wondering, sorry, Marco.
and we should continue to insist that Canadians ought to continue to speak their minds and share their views regardless of who they displease. This is one of the features that has built this country as great as it has been so far. We are currently under this cloud of a threat of restricting legislation restricting freedom of expression and freedom of speech on the internet and in several other different things. This, I would submit, is an un-Canadian project to try to restrict people's freedom. We will not have a better history if we are not able to discuss and argue and maybe even get mad about what it is that our history is.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. So let's be very clear that teaching the next generation, let alone the current one, about the values that has enabled this country to succeed are so important. And one of them would be freedom of expression, property rights. I mean, there's a whole series of them that are incredibly important to convey. And why is that? Because really everything is at stake. When you do not have freedom of expression, you do not have the ability to seek the truth, to have healthy debate, to be able to pursue not only the expression of the truth, but prosperity as well. How do you innovate if you cannot have freedom of expression? And I would say at the core of it is if you do not have freedom of expression, you are no longer human. So I think this is why the values that make us Canadian are more important than ever. And I see, frankly, some green shoots of a renewal in this country where people are waking up and realizing that to have your bank defunded or to be able to somehow to be compelled to say certain things on certain topics is totally inappropriate and against our traditions of what it means to be Canadian. So, are those signs of hope that our country is starting to wake up and realize that, yes, we do need to renew not only our military, but we need to renew those traditions and wisdoms of what has enabled our country to succeed? Are you seeing those signs of hope as well, Gerry?
No, not at
No,
all.
you're not. Okay, what
I
about you,
wish-
Marco?
I wish I could, but no.
I see some in slight variations, but look, I did not come to this country because I was certain that I was going to be treated worse than everyone else. I came to this country not because I thought I was going to be treated better than everyone else. I came to this country with the certainty that I would be treated just like everyone else. And so, equality under the law is a big one. This idea, such a quaint idea from Martin Luther King, that people ought to be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. So the slight hope that I see is that there is a slight movement in the culture to reverse a lot of this identity nonsense that we see just about everywhere,
Sure.
and that people are demanding more and more that regardless of the color of the skin or their religion or whatever their culture, and this includes a push against sort of this multiculturalism, that people are treated by the state in the same way.
No, I agree.
We have a
and I think
constitution. Sorry, go ahead. Leo. No, well, I was going to say we have a constitution that permits, in fact, encourages racial discrimination, and until we get rid of that, Section 15, is it?
Yes.
We're in trouble. I mean, we have. How can we innovate when the government offers research chairs in astrophysics, but says white heterosexual males cannot apply for this?
Bizarre. Yeah, no, it's absurd. Yeah. So this is where we need a kind of a clear-eyed picture of the reality of the challenges that we face. And we're in a very important time in the renewal of our country or the continued decline. And I want to put some things into perspective. We've had certainly a far-reaching conversation today, and as we kind of round the lap here, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the audience's questions and comments, and I encourage you to like the program and share it. I think these are important. These are important issues that we're talking about today. Certainly, as we look to being proud Canadians, and what does it mean to celebrate Canada Day, and what does it mean to be Canadian? Because it's really a foundational question to where we will go as a country. And just to put things into perspective, the last number of years, and I could give you 10 or 15-year kind of data points, we have been going through a significant decline. I mean, the facts are that our economy has stagnated, people's incomes have stagnated, the middle class is disappearing or is certainly been undermined. People are poor. And why is this? Because if your income as a point of GDP, if you look at per capita income on all these scales the last 10 years alone, we know that we have stagnated. So in the challenge here is that we also have inflation. So people are poor, and there's all kinds of data around this. So one of my concerns is that as the middle class gets smaller, and I did have the occasion to take a fascinating course with Hillsdale College on citizenship, and we looked at Greek history and the importance of the Minos, the middle, where you had self-sufficient parties in the middle of society that served in the military, that served in different democratic institutions, played an incredible role. So if you have people that are just trying to survive, they're not really thriving. They're just trying to make their way through the challenges of making a living. How do you renew a country if their standard of living is declining? Does that have a big bearing on this question of renewing our country?
You talk about shoots of hope. One of the reasons I don't invest much optimism in the future is that it seems pretty clear to Canadians what's happened over the past 10 years, and yet they turned around and elected the same government. We're not, of all the things that Canadians do well, we're not a high information, high interest electorate. And anything to encourage more civic education would help in this regard.
Okay, so yeah, and so there's a debate. Well, is this the same government? And I think that's what we're trying to understand: is are they going to be pursuing the same path of policies? So that is a debate, but it does your point does raise the question: how do you do this if you have a legacy media that's on the dole, so to speak? Some 2,000 of them receiving significant federal subsidies. Is that part of the question, Marco?
Sure. I think Gerry is right in his read of this. I think the antidote here is courage. I see a direct connection between, for example, stampeding people into fear that the big bad orange guy was going to come and steal their things and take over their country and whatever, with the same kind of fear that the elites instilled in people during COVID, and through that arm of fear, they made them ply, and they made them become basically accommodating of just about whatever policy government decided it was good or said to be good. This country, in a country like this especially, is built on courage. The courage that the first French and English people, the Scots and the Irish, had to come and brave the elements and build this country. The Aboriginals themselves. If you look outside when it's minus 40, does it not make us wonder how our Aboriginal brothers and sisters lived in this inhospitable place in those conditions? That requires courage. Courage is in the DNA of our country, and we need to retrieve it if we want to get this country back.
Right on. So the importance of courage as we look to renewing our country is important. And I think that I'm inspired by the conversation today as we look both at the reality of the challenges we face, but also remembering our history, both proud and challenges that we can learn from. But we have a country that is worth saving. And I guess my question now is, will we have the will to be able to renew? Because if we don't, I think ironically, we will lose not only our sovereignty, but that's when we become, frankly, a broken nation that will not succeed, and ironically will become the 50. What is it called again? The 51st state. Am I being silly about this? I mean, if you can't move your economy forward, if you can't get things built, if you can't move your culture forward, if you just denigrate into kind of tribalism of hate, then what is the future of your country? I mean, this is pretty sad stuff, isn't it, Gerry?
I think so. As Canadians become visibly poorer in comparison to Europe and the United States, some kind of crisis has to erupt. People will begin to say, well, the Canadian experiment has failed. we should be Americans or Europeans. Join the EU. If the country continues to mistreat the West, separatism arises there. I don't see any future for a fragmented Canada, even if one part breaks away. The rest, geographically not linked, historically not linked, culturally irrelevant to each other. Yeah, and I think economics is going to prove the test by which Canada hangs together.
Okay. What do you say, Marco?
People who love this country, and there are many, should see in the challenges from Quebec and from Alberta an opportunity. And the opportunity is to renew and to reset. If we simply dismiss their concerns, this country and the centrifugal forces that operate inside this country will tear it apart. But it is possible to see and treat seriously what it is that Quebecers want, what is it that the folks in Saskatchewan and Alberta want, and see how we reach a compromise. This country was built on compromise. It would have been impossible to stitch the country such as it is in 1867 without compromise. Let's remember that in order to put this country together, one had to tear apart the Canadas, right? Upper and Lower Canada, where one had to be torn apart, divided, made individual pieces in order to put it all back together again. These kinds of compromises are not beyond the wit of Canadians, but what is lacking is essentially the open-mindedness and the will to do it.
All right. Well, look, I want to bring to an end our conversation today and thank everyone, both Marco Navarro-Genie and Gerry Bowler, for this incredible discussion, and our audience. We know that Canada is an incredible country. We are going through challenges, but this is surely the opportunity for us to come together more than ever and celebrate Canada Day, this incredible country, its people, its land, everything about it is really before us. And surely our vision is that we can be the freest, most prosperous nation in the world if we choose to do so. And I think that's the answer, is that every citizen on this Canada Day, I would encourage you to think in not only your mind, but to also hold in your heart the conviction that this country matters and that we need to come together and renew it more than ever. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I wish you a great Canada Day, and we'll see you next week on Thursday.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.